In this presentation, you will learn about the theory of suicide as expressed by Emile Durkheim. According to Durkheim, suicide is applied to all cases of death resulting directly or indirectly from a positive or negative act of the victim himself, which he knows will produce this result. For generations, suicide is considered to be one of the personal acts that a person may exhibit. Durkheim believed that if he was able to explain suicide with the help of sociology, it would be easy to extend and link sociology to private or personal phenomenon. Durkheim, being a sociologist, was interested in studying the reason behind the rate of suicide in a particular community than the reason why a particular person commits suicide. He explained the differences in suicidal rates, and he was interested in finding out the reason behind the higher rate of suicide in one community than the other. He believed that a psychologist and biological factors can very well explain why a person commits suicide, but only the social facts reveal the reason why one particular group had higher rate of suicide. Integration and regulation. The theory of Durkheim on suicide can be very well understood if we examine the link between the types of suicide and the rooted social facts, namely integration and regulation. Integration means the bond that a person has with his or her society. Regulation means the restrictions that a person has on people. For Durkheim, suicide is dependent on integration and regulation variables, and suicide rate may rise if either of them is too low or too high. High integration and low integration may result in altruistic and egoistic suicide respectively, and high regulation and low regulation results in fatalistic and anomic suicide respectively. Let us now look into the different types of suicide. Altruistic suicide. When society imposes upon the individual personality has little value in the larger scheme. The individual attaches his identity, his whole self to the group, and when he or she commits suicide, that is altruistic suicide. It is out of obligatory, too much of social integration, attachment towards the social group. It is also out of a sense of honor or duty attached to the group. Altruistic suicide is more likely to occur when social integration is too strong. The individual is literally forced into committing suicide. More generally, those who commit altruistic suicide do so because they feel that it is their duty to do so. For example, in the Titanic movie, when the captain doesn't step outside the ship, however, he remains in the same room even when the ship is about to submerge. It is due to the attachment towards the material object, the ship. This could be possible because of the high integration of the captain towards the material object ship, and he felt it was his failure that as a captain he couldn't protect his passengers. Egoistic suicide. This type of suicide takes place when the individual feels alienated from the group. The social integration in this category is comparatively less. There is a lack of sense of belonging on the part of the individual. Durkheim believed that lack of integration may result in egoistic suicide because the person may feel that he or she does not belong to the larger society. It can also be interpreted as the society is not the part of the individual. He believed that the better part of a human being, such as the morality, values, and sense of purpose, are due to the larger society. The larger society also helps to heal the daily chaos and provides us with moral support. Without the help of society, a person cannot survive for the long run, and he or she may commit suicide for smaller disappointments. Therefore, he believes that egoistic suicides are more prone to happen in societies where integration is less. Due to the differences in social integration, there will be difference in social currents as well. These differences in social currents may end up in differences in suicidal rates. Politics is generally seen as a domination of futility, and morality is more often seen as a personal choice. It can be viewed as strongly integrated society discourage suicide on a great extent. If a society has high integration, the social currents produced will discourage egoistic suicides. It also provides people with meaning of life. Durkheim states that religion safeguards man from self-harm or self-destruction. An amount of belief and practice constitute religion, which is followed by most of the people. If a person is highly committed to religion, he will be highly integrated to the religious community, and thus he will have a higher support system. Therefore, he will not be in a state of self-destruction for smaller frustrations. But Durkheim states that not all the religions provide equal support for people. The religion which focuses on the individual rather than worshipping provide less integration of the community members. Therefore, the protection of the people from self-destruction is less. From this, it is clear that the importance is of the degree of integration and not on the beliefs and rituals. The statistics developed by Durkheim state that people who are unmarried tend to have less social integration and therefore suicide rates go up. In the time of crisis such as war, pandemic, etc., the value of life is known to the people and suicide rates are comparatively less during these times. Therefore, it can be summarized as increased feeling of integration help persons to resist suicidal ideation. Anomic suicide. Anomic suicide is likely to happen when the regulatory powers of the society are disturbed. Such disturbances are likely to leave individuals frustrated because their desires, which are free to run wild in an insatiable race for pleasure, have little power. The rate of anomic suicides are likely to increase irrespective of the positive and negative disruption. Both positive and negative disruptions have an adverse effect on the individuals. Such conditions put people in new situations that old norms are no longer viable and new norms are yet to develop. The currents of anomy are dependent on the periods of disruption, and these would result in the higher rate of anomic suicide. For example, during economic depression, people who are employed in a factory would be affected and would probably end up unemployed. This unemployment would make the person vulnerable to the after effects of currents of anomy and prone to self-destruction. The effect of economic boom is difficult to imagine. Durkheim suggests that immediate success often pulls people from the traditional system they were practicing. This sudden shift may force the people to take up new jobs, find new partners, and eventually to change the standard of living. All these new changes will hinder the regulations and make the people vulnerable to anomic social currents. In such a scenario, the actions of people are freed from control and even their dreams are no longer held back. There seems to be endless opportunities for people in an economic boom, and reality seems valueless compared to the dreams of fevered imaginations. The high rate of anomic suicide during deregulation of social life are consistent with Durkheim's view on the effect of individual passion free from external disruptions. Those people will become slaves of passion and in Durkheim's view will commit suicide. Fatalistic suicide. This type of suicide is a little discussed by Durkheim in the footnote of suicide. Fatalistic and anomic suicide are dependent on regulations. While anomic suicide is dependent on lack of regulation, fatalistic suicide occurs due to excessive regulation. Those people who are likely to commit fatalistic suicide are persons with futures pitilessly blocked and passions violently choked by oppressive discipline. For example, a slave who takes up his life because of the hopelessness that he had due to the oppressive controlling of his every action. Too much of controlling or regulation may result in the increased rate of fatalistic suicide. The social currents seriously affect the rate of suicide happening in a particular area. Individual suicides are affected by those social currents such as egoism, altruism, anomy, and fatalism. The social currents dominate the decision of the individuals, and the rate of suicide of a particular community can only be explained with the help of social currents. I hope you now have a better understanding of the theory of suicide as explained by Emile Durkheim. Thank you for watching the presentation.